Bun venit la o nouă ediție a emisiunii Ziua se apropie. În minutele care urmează vă prezentăm un material realizat de Andrew Tucker, director Think, ca urmare a cererii ONU adresate Curții Internaționale de Justiție de la Haga de a emite un aviz consultativ, lucru pe care l-a și făcut în data de 19 iulie, în legătură cu așa numita ocupare prelungită a teritoriilor palestiniene de către Israel. În introducerea acestui material va vorbi Peter Hugendorn, președinte Think, care spune că, deși avizul emis este doar consultativ, acesta va avea un important impact pe plan politic mondial.
I'm standing in front of the Peace Palace in The Hague, the seat of the International Court of Justice. We were here this afternoon to listen to the advisory opinion. The President of the Court has read out major portions of the advisory opinion regarding the prolonged occupation of Israel of the so-called Palestinian territories. Some people ask, why is this relevant? It's only an advice, but it is relevant, mostly because of its political impact. The United Nations General Assembly have asked for an advisory opinion, and when such an opinion is rendered, the expectation is that all countries will follow up. Now, even though it was a minority of the states members of the General Assembly, the impact can be very great because the court has asked and expects all nations to live up to their advice.
Curtea Internațională de Justiție de la Haga a decis în respectivul aviz consultativ că evreii nu au dreptul să trăiască în Iudeea și Samaria și nici măcar în orașul vechi al Ierusalimului. Andrew Tucker.
Today, Friday, the 19th of July, the International Court of Justice has decided here in the Peace Palace, in an advisory opinion to the General Assembly, that the Israeli presence in the so-called occupied territories has become illegal, contrary to international law. Israel must end, it must withdraw from the territories as quickly as possible. Settlements are illegal and settlements must be disbanded. So what the court has actually decided here is not a binding decision, it's an opinion, but nevertheless a very important opinion, is that Jews have no right to live in Judea and Samaria or even in the old city of Jerusalem. It was a little bit like the court was deciding in the abstract about a territory that they have no idea that Jews have been living in for hundreds and thousands of years. And the court is effectively saying today that the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, and even the state of Israel, which consists of Jews and non-Jews, has no single right to be in those territories. This is a very significant decision, and it's very important that we understand the significance of what is being decided today. Effectively, the court is advocating an apartheid regime whereby Jews are forced to live in the western part of Palestine, current Israel, and are not allowed to live in the so-called Palestinian territories, but Palestinians are allowed to live in both. This is an extraordinary decision.
Întrebarea care se pune în acest context este: impune oare Curtea Internațională de Justiție un regim de apartheid? Din nou cu explicații Andrew Tucker.
When we think about this concept of apartheid, right? At the moment, in all the territory west of the Jordan River, between the river and the sea, Jews and Arabs are living together. In Israel, 20% of Israelis are non-Jewish. They're Arabs or of other nationalities. This is not an apartheid state. They all have rights to live. In the so-called occupied territories, Jews and Arabs are living. The Arabs want to live separately in their own area. And now the court is turning things around in a very strange way. They are saying that Israel must be a democratic state where Jews and Arabs are living, but for the occupied territories, Jews are not allowed to live. Now this, to my mind, is creating a kind of apartheid regime. Israel is being accused of apartheid, but the court is now imposing, as it were, a regime that discriminates between Jews and non-Jews. It's forcing Jews to move out of those territories under the pretense that it is illegal for them to be there.
Un alt aspect al acestui aviz consultativ îl reprezintă abordarea defectuoasă pe care instanța o are față de dreptul internațional în sine. Urmăriți explicațiile.
Another aspect of this advisory opinion is the approach that the court takes to international law itself. And we believe that actually this decision is not going to advance international law, but is undermining the structure of international law. One of the most important parts of international law is the stability and security of states. If you hear this opinion, you would think that international law is just about human rights, it's just about self-determination rights, it's just about international humanitarian law. The court picks up history in 1967 and completely ignores the history prior to 1967. There's no explanation about why the Jewish people are there. There's no explanation of how the state of Israel came into existence. There's no explanation of how the state of Israel was attacked by the Arab states in 1948, how it was attacked again in 1967. There's no understanding about the security needs of the state of Israel. Instead, the court puts all of the attention on the Palestinians' right to use violence to assert their rights to self-determination. There's no recognition of the needs of the sovereign state of Israel to secure its territory, to have secure borders, and to secure its citizens against attacks. And this is a very one-sided approach to international law, which, as we say, will undermine the security of states, not only in the Middle East, but generally. If the new legal regime is simply about decolonization and the removing of occupation, then we've ignored a very important principle of international law, uti possidetis juris, which is the foundation of many states in the world.
Iar în final, dar nu de minimă importanță, haideți să înțelegem care vor fi pe viitor implicațiile avizului consultativ emis de Curtea Internațională de Justiție de la Haga pe 19 iulie 2024 legat de dreptul Israelului de a fi acolo unde este de mii de ani.
Well, it's Friday, the 19th of July. Standing outside the Peace Palace, the International Court of Justice has just issued its advisory opinion on the so-called Israeli prolonged occupation of the occupied Palestinian territory. And in this video, I want to just give you a kind of an overall sense of what the court has decided. What is the significance of what has been decided today, and we'll think a little bit about some of the implications. First of all, we need to understand that the opinion that was issued today is the result of a long process which has led to here, actually over the last 100 years. Ever since the fall of the Ottoman Turkish Empire in 1918, the end of the First World War, and the idea that the Jewish people would have a homeland in Palestine. From that moment, a part of the Arab Palestinian society, the more radical part, has opposed the very idea that the Jewish people could have self-determination and autonomy in what they consider to be exclusively Arab territory. Okay, I won't go into the history, but the Jewish people belong in the Middle East. They've always been one of the most important people groups in the Middle East. And this idea of a Jewish homeland was not strange, but was just to recognize that their birthplace was the territory that later became known as Palestine. But for the Jewish people is Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. Now, the Palestinian rejection of that idea is exactly the same rejection as we've seen in the court over the past year. The Palestinians and the Arab states and the Islamic states with them came to this court with the claim that the Palestinians are the true and only owners of Palestine. They don't mean the occupied territories, they mean from the river to the sea. They deny the validity of the mandate for Palestine and the Jewish national home. Now, the next step in their reasoning is to use the law of occupation and the law of self-determination to achieve their goal. So the whole case was crafted around the choice of questions that the General Assembly put to the court. The court was kind of restricted to the questions that the General Assembly put, and those questions were very much around Israel's violation of the Palestinian right to self-determination and its violation of the law of occupation. And the court was simply asked to give an opinion about the legal consequences of those violations. Now, the court says, well, we don't just assume that, we will study the matter. But in doing so, they relied upon all these UN documents which reaffirm the Palestinian claims and deny any single Israeli claim whatsoever to the territories. They even deny in the United Nations the validity of the Jewish homeland under the mandate. So that is the context within which the court has issued an opinion today. So what has the court decided? Well, basically it's decided three things. First of all, it says we start the historical and legal analysis in 1967. In June 67, Israel took these territories in a defensive war against the Arabs. They say from that moment, Israel was an occupying power. They look at the law of occupation. They say that under the law of occupation, you're not entitled to annex the territory. You're not entitled to claim the territory as your own. You're not entitled to impose your own legal system. You have to give that territory back to the original owners. So secondly, they say, who are the original owners of this territory? The Palestinians. They have a self-determination right, which is effectively a right to sovereignty over natural resources, a sovereignty right to the territory. So the Palestinians suddenly, according to the court, become the legitimate owners of this territory because of the principle of self-determination. So they are the two main things, the law of occupation and the law of self-determination, leading thirdly to this claim in relation to sovereignty. Now what this does is ignores everything historically and legally that happened prior to June 1967. What happened in June 1967 is that Israel was defending itself against yet another aggressive war of the Arab states to eliminate it. Judge Sebutindi, in her dissenting opinion, explains this extremely well, the history leading up to 1967. And an important part of that history is that the State of Israel was created in 1948 in Palestine. The territory of the State of Israel was intended to be Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, which was Palestine west of the Jordan River. That's extremely important because the Palestinians rejected on several occasions. Judge Sebutindi also looks at these rejections from 1937 onwards, right up to 1947 and beyond. They reject two-state solutions. So when Israel was created, it was created in the land of mandate Palestine, and under the principle of uti possidetis iuris, it's the principle that's really determined the borders of pretty much half the countries in the world that have emerged from mandates or trusts or colonies or administrations. The new state takes on the boundaries of the prior regime. Well, the state of Israel took on the boundaries of the mandate for Palestine. That means that when Jordan occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem for 19 years and destroyed every synagogue, every Jewish person was removed from the territory, Israel still had a valid and legitimate claim to that territory. So in June 67, when Israel took back the territory, it was taking back control of territory to which it already had prior sovereign claims. And Israel asserted those claims in relation to Jerusalem. So the court is saying today that East Jerusalem does not belong to Israel. Now, we believe this is contrary to international law under this principle, and for many other reasons. Historically, Israel has a sound and a strong claim to sovereignty over the whole city of Jerusalem. And by the way, recent polls show that the Arabs in East Jerusalem prefer to live under Israeli sovereignty than under a future Palestinian state, because they know it's a secure state. So these are the sovereign claims of Israel, which the court has ignored in these advisory opinion proceedings. Secondly, the court has ignored the broader context of the conflict. It has completely ignored Palestinian terrorism, Arab terrorism, the influence of Iran in the region. It sweeps aside Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is also in the West Bank. Israel is fighting for its existence against regimes that are not just trying to kill people, they're trying to eliminate the state of Israel. None of that in this opinion. You would think, if you heard this opinion, that the Palestinians and all of them, and the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad want nothing more than a peaceful state living in coexistence with Israel. Well, if you read even the PLO claims in the court here, the so-called state of Palestine, they're not just claiming the West Bank, they're claiming all of Palestine from the river to the sea. So we are afraid that this decision is going to play into the hands of those who are out shouting on the streets for Palestine. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Israel must be eliminated. Israel must be destroyed. This is the context within which this advisory opinion is taking place. So finally, what is the consequence? What are the implications? Well, this is an advisory opinion, 15 judges of the court. It is not a binding decision. The court has made orders. It has reached conclusions. Those conclusions are directed to the General Assembly. And effectively, the court is saying, well, now the ball is in your court, General Assembly, Security Council, to decide what you do with these legal findings of ours. They say that every state in the world is obliged to ensure that Israel withdraws from the whole of these territories as rapidly as possible. And the question is up to the General Assembly to decide what that means and how it should be effectuated. What we're going to see is an explosion of the BDS movement, boycotts, divestments, sanctions against Israel. We are going to see an explosion of anti-Semitism. This is an affirmation that Zionism is illegitimate in the eyes of many. Those who are hostile to Israel will use what is said here to advance their extremist claims. This is now going to be a political decision. Every member state, and maybe we just finish with this, but every UN member state has its own responsibility to make its own independent determination of what international law says or does not say on these questions. And we invite the member states, we invite legal advisors, we invite all those who engage in this issue to study this seriously, read Judge Sebutindi's dissenting opinion, read also the separate opinions and declarations by other judges, you'll see that the issues are much more complex and nuanced than the court has presented here. And it's very important that we take a look at the conflict and the role of international law in relation to the conflict in historical perspective. We cannot sweep history aside. Yes, we can look at the Palestinian claims. Yes, the Palestinians have a right to autonomy. Yes, we wish them an independence, but you cannot do that at the expense of a sovereign member state of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Emisiunea Ziua se apropie, se încheie aici, dar am dorit să lansăm un apel special la rugăciune pentru poporul Israel, poporul ales al lui Dumnezeu, ca Domnul să-l izbăvească și să-l scoată biruitor pe toate planurile, iar slava lui Dumnezeu să se vadă și să fie recunoscută în întreaga lume prin biruința Israelului. Vă mulțumim pentru atenție și vă dăm o nouă întâlnire săptămâna viitoare la aceeași oră. Sunt Codruța Burghelea, vă spun la revedere, Dumnezeu să binecuvinteze Israelul și Dumnezeu să vă binecuvânteze pe dumneavoastră.
Alpha,